Okay, so it is my pleasure to welcome you to our first post-spring break NSF Career Writing Group. Hopefully we'll have a few more folks filter in. But this is where we're getting down into more of the nuts and bolts of actually kind of building the pieces of your proposal that we'll need. So before spring break, we focused a lot on the research project and what's a good project, what's compelling, the broader impacts that you have to have with that. And now we're kind of pivoting a little bit to all the stuff that goes around your project narrative that's easy to forget about until the end. Our first one is the other kind of key piece that really impacts how your project is going to work, and that is the question of how are you spending your money? What are you doing with it? And are you going to have enough money to do what you want to do? And so I'm pleased that the Office of Sponsored Programs Administrative Services is here to kind of first do a short overview of what you need to know about NSF and career budgets more specifically, and then we have our grant specialist that can sit down with you and kind of start the first steps of how to make your budget. And Brent Earhart is going to be telling us what we need to know in the first part.
Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Brent Earhart. I am the Assistant Director for Contracts and Awards and Sponsored Programs. And I'm also joined by my wonderful staff, Riley Parker and Abby Spivey, who are grant specialists. So since this is NSF career oriented, I will try to address that specifically, but I will also try to make my budget information broad enough so that it applies outward to NSF in general. However, we'll note a couple special restrictions with this NSF career. It has a few restrictions that are unusually specific and that don't typically apply to most NSF programs. So it's good to just bear in mind that in general, NSF has pretty easy budget rules to follow, but occasionally the specific solicitation guidelines you're looking at will supersede whatever is in their normal procedures and tell you have to do it a specific way. So we'll get into that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the total award amount. So the total award amount is going to include all of your direct costs and all of your indirect costs. I'll get into those in a minute. One specific thing with NSF Career is that it has two different minimum total awards. So often you'll see that you have a maximum total award, but the guidelines here said that you have to budget for a minimum of this amount. And it gives you a total project period, meaning the total amount of time that your project would be going on and how many years you'd be budgeting for. So the minimum for a project period is 5 years, and the minimum is, in general, $400,000 over 5 years. So that means when you add up every single year, year 1, year 2, year 3, 4, etc., you would have to be reaching to a minimum of $400,000. However, if you are doing one of the programs I have listed over here under the $500,000 mark, such as the bio, so Directorate for Biological Sciences, Directorate for Engineering, or the Office of Polar Programs, your minimum is supposed to be $500,000 over 5 years. Now, there's another bit of advice in the guidelines about how much your total award should be, and I have excerpted that here. And so it says, many programs and directorates prefer to make more awards by funding career proposals closer to the minimum award size. So we'll stop right there. That means that in general they prefer that your budget is closer to those minimums. So $400,000 total or $500,000 total if you are in one of those programs that I mentioned. That doesn't mean you have to be right on the money, right? You don't have to just have $400,000. It means in general they prefer to fund the minimum amount. That's because NSF is basically given a large pot of money, and so if all of the awards are closer to the minimum amount, they can issue more awards more generally. But that doesn't mean you have to have the minimum award size. However, one curious thing that they also note is that proposers should review the list of recent career awards made in their discipline for guidance on average award size. Now you'd think that NSF would provide a nice table for you, but they don't. So I went into their site and requested this information, and it told me too much information, we'll send to you during off hours. This was done 48 hours ago, and they never sent it to me. So I was going to make a spreadsheet and show you some of the average award sizes, and I was not able to do that. So
I will say, those of you who have been here know that if you're applying for NSF Career, you have to direct it to a specific program. So you can also download for just that program,
Yes.
as opposed to by directorate, and then find the career ones.
You can, yes. You would hope that NSF made it easier for you to do this, but they don't. So I made a QR code here if you want to take a picture, or I can share the slides with people. So what the QR code does is it takes you to a site that shows you it shows you a map of the United States. You can click on the state, and then it just gives you total amounts given to universities in that state. So if you clicked on Virginia Tech, you'd see 500 million, whatever. So you can click through and go and find them. However, it's a little annoying. You kind of have to have two tabs open to see what program you're looking at and who you're looking at. You have a question? Yes.
Are you able to share an actual URL for that? I think the QR code might be a little dense.
Yeah, yes, definitely, yes. I can do that. I can share the slides and the URL. I'll note the URL is on the landing page for NSF Career, so they do have a little button at the bottom. Yeah. So yeah, I guess it's not going to work very well, is it?
No, it's a little dense.
It's too dense. Yeah. Whoops, sorry. Okay, I'm new with the QR codes. Putting them in slides, but yeah, I can definitely share it, and it is on the landing page.
Okay.
So when you figure out your discipline, this is something you could ask us to do. We could kind of help you look around. In general, though, I would say don't spend too much time trying to make your total award exactly the same amount as a comparable award elsewhere. It's just not worth your time. And if NSF really likes your budget, or they really like your proposal and they think your budget's a little bloated, they'll work with you to reduce it. So don't spend too much time worrying about it, but it's a nice cherry on the top if you want to compare the total award size. Now I'm going to get into a couple special restrictions that apply to NSF Career specifically, and then some things you should know about NSF in general. So on NSF Career specifically, you're not allowed to have co-PIs. This is not normally an NSF restriction. Typically you're allowed to have several co-PIs, but for the NSF Career program, you're not allowed to have a co-PI, meaning you can't have somebody listed as a co-principal investigator. You are allowed to have other senior personnel, but they expect that you limit their compensation. And I'll talk about that momentarily. So no co-PIs allowed. There's also something we call the 2-month salary rule. This applies to NSF in general. So NSF use more than 2 months of the equivalent of your salary as excessive compensation. And it's not that you're not allowed to ask for more than 2 months, they just don't like to fund it. So if you ask for more than 2 months, you have to have special language in your budget justification explaining why you're asking for more than 2 months. Now where this gets tricky is NSF also considers course release part of your personal compensation. And this has to do with uniform guidance, federal rules. I won't get into it too specifically. But basically, if you're requesting a course release, and the equivalent of that course release when we calculate it is, let's say, 1.5 months out of your 9 months that you would teach, that means 1.5 months of the compensation you can ask for is now out the window. So it's a little bit unfair. It does disadvantage people when they're asking for course releases. So it's something to be aware of. But in general, they only want you to have 2 months of compensation equivalent, or they view it as excessive compensation. Another restriction on this, or rather recommendation, is that the PI should budget for at least 1 month of salary per year. So in the course of NSF career program, your proposal, they expect that you'll ask for at least 1 month of salary per year, per budget year. They also say that the proposal should have 1 graduate student per year. Now, that can be the same graduate student, or it can be a different graduate student every year. They're not very specific. They also don't say what kind of compensation they're supposed to have. So we can get into ways to pay them. And I found that a little odd that they were requiring grad students.
I thought that was a recommendation, not a requirement.
Yeah, it's a recommendation.
Because that's something that we addressed in some of the ones earlier. At JMU, it can be hard to get a graduate student.
Yeah, so yeah, it is a recommendation. It means they would strongly prefer it. If you can't swing that, it's okay. But I did think that was odd. Typically, they don't say that they strongly recommend a graduate student. So And of course, another recommendation is that you should have at least 2 trips a year. Now, they don't say who should be going on these trips, it just says 2 trips a year. So that would be up to you, whether it's you and your grad student, you and somebody else that's on your project. Okay, so those are a couple of the special restrictions and recommendations to keep in mind. Now I want to get into something that's a little more technical. This is where our grant specialists and myself, oh, yes, question, go ahead.
Could I ask about the travel?
Yes.
For example, 2 people going to the same conference, is that 2 trips a year?
That's a good question. So I think that they would count it as 1 trip. So typically they would count trips per, they would basically say it's a trip and it doesn't matter how many people are going on it. So they would count that as 1 trip. Unless it was you were going to a conference and then your other senior personnel was going to a conference a month later. But if you're going to the same event together, they'd count that as 1 trip, typically. That's a good question.
Brent, do you think there's leeway because we're an R2 university without 11 graduate students on that 2-month salary rule instead of grad students, or is that pretty set in stone?
The 2-month salary rule is always set in stone, but now again, I'll say this, it doesn't mean you can't ask for more than 2 months of salary. You can. It's just something to watch out for. They scrutinize it a little more closely. But if you don't, but if we say that you, for whatever reason, you're not able to get a grad student to work on this, you don't have another senior personnel helping you do whatever your project is, they might look less at the 2-month rule. They might be like, okay, they're not asking for a grad student. They're not putting somebody else's pay on here. Maybe it's fine that they have over 2 months. Does that make sense? So, in general, when we're doing budgets, there are 2 large pools of money. There are direct costs and indirect costs. And I'm going to try not to get too technical with this because this is where the grant specialists make their money. We come in and we help you do all of this, but it's good for you to know how this works in general so that you don't feel like we're lying to you and just making things up on the spreadsheet. So I'll give you a very high level overview of how direct costs and indirect costs work. Basically, the total per year and the total in general of your budget is going to be broken down into direct and indirect costs. So direct costs are kind of easy to understand. They're something that's very specific to what you're doing and it's very easy to list on your budget. So if you're putting in a month of work per year on a month of compensated work per year on your project, that's a direct cost. Your benefits, right? So the FICA that you have to pay on it, basically your Social Security, all of those other nice things that the federal government taxes you for, that's included, so that's a direct cost. If you're asking for a specific piece of equipment, that's a direct cost. Or if you're traveling somewhere or asking for materials and supplies. All of those things are direct costs. Easy to put on the budget, easy to identify, easy to say why they're needed. Indirect costs, on the other hand, as you might guess, are not as easy to put on the budget. It's a more generalized pool of money, and it's things that are not necessarily being charged just for your program. So indirect costs can apply to multiple programs moving forward. So some of the money that you get in direct costs goes to fund future research down the road at JMU. Some of the money helps JMU recover things that you're not asking for. So for example, if you were, let's say you were doing a science experiment and you were testing things out on mice, right? So you're paying for the mice and you are paying people to assist you on it. You're not putting, I'm going to use this many kilowatts, megawatts, whatever, of hours of energy in the JMU lab on my budget, right? That would be ridiculous to ask you to calculate how much electricity you're going to be using, to calculate how much air you're breathing, all of those things, right? Those are indirect costs. So the school makes back a portion of the money it spends supporting your research through indirect costs because it would be ridiculous to say, I know how much electricity I'm going to use at any given moment, right? So the nice thing about indirect costs is you don't have to worry about all of those things. They're covered in the pool of money that is indirect costs. So we have our direct costs, those are the things that are specific on the budget. We have our indirect costs, the things that are not as easy to put on the budget. Indirect costs are basically going to be, the easiest way for you to think about them is that they're just going to be a percentage of the direct costs. So what happens is you have all of your direct costs, they come down into a pool, we call it a base. We then remove a handful of things from that base that are not allowed to be charged as indirect costs. So we modify the base, and then from that modified base, we calculate indirect costs on that pool, right? So it'll be a percentage calculated on that pool. And you don't have to concern yourself too much with what's in that pool. That's where we come in handy. We'll help you figure out what's modified from there.
So then those minimums that you showed for 100K and 500K includes
Yes.
both, right?
Yes, so that's something to be aware of. If you ask for $200,000 of direct costs and your indirect rate was 50%, then 50% of 200 would be added on top of what you're asking for. So yes, the totals are your direct costs and your indirect costs.
And what's the state of indirect costs now?
So for organized research on campus, unless your project starts tomorrow, which isn't going to happen, right? It's going to be 52%. So as I said, your grant specialists are going to help you calculate the indirect costs. So just something to be aware of, right? That there are these two pools of money, and we're not making things up when you put $200,000 on the budget and all of a sudden the number of the total goes way up. So just for your reference, Jen used indirect cost rates right now for on-campus research is 52%. For off-campus research, it would be 26%. I'm assuming that most of what you all are doing would probably be on-campus research. Typically, that's the most common thing that we see as a project type for NSF. And I also just wanted to note, research is a little bit broader of a term. So it would also include activities where you're training other people to do research or training them in research techniques. Any questions about direct costs and indirect costs? Alrighty. So now I wanted to move into some more specific examples about how NSF budgets work. So this is not, our template will look something like this, but it'll be in the spreadsheet, and of course we'll help you with that. This is what you'd see on their actual website, research.gov, and I'm just going to break down some of the categories and make some notes for you quickly about what you can expect to go where. So in category A, senior key personnel, that is where your the amount of salary you're asking for would go. That's where your course releases would go, things of that nature. So in this instance, your COPI would also go there, but you're not allowed to have a COPI for NSF CAREER. So it's going to be just you and perhaps other senior personnel. And when you're asking for your salary, it's basically done we come up with a calculation to break down your salary per month. And so then you ask for an equivalent of months that you're putting in. So just note that while in theory it would be nice if you were compensated for every single second of everything you did to put into this grant to make it work, that's not how it works. You're not going to get paid for all of the work you do on this grant. You're only ever going to be paid for a portion of the work that you're doing on the grant. That's just the way that it works. So if you're I guess in the system they're called 10-month employees. We, on our side, call them 9-month employees. But if you teach and then have the summer off, that would be a different type of pay as opposed to if you were a 12-month employee. Meaning somebody who's always working, you don't get spring break off, you work 12 months a year for the university. So if you're a 9/10-month employee and you get the summers off, typically, the easiest way to ask for compensation would be your summer months. So you get 3 summer months that you can ask for.
But they want to. But they prefer to.
No, they prefer no more than 2 in general. Yes, yeah, and they said that you should be asking for at least 1 month. So you're going to ask for at least 1 month on your budget here. And so in theory, though, too, do note that this means that if you're asking for a summer month, then when you are going to collect on that work that you did, the work that you're specifically invoicing for is supposed to occur during the summer. So that doesn't mean you can't only work on the project during the summer, right? But it does mean that when you're saying, basically when you're saying what you're going to do in the summer happens, you should do that in the summer, in theory.
Does this factor in promotion, raise, wage increases?
Yes, so when we calculate your salary, right now we are calculating a 3% annual merit increase. So there will be one in June. It might not take effect till July, but the state of Virginia has already said there will be a 3-month, or a 3% merit increase. There's also gonna be a 1.5% bonus over the summer. And so usually, we would project outward 5 years, we're just gonna assume 3% increase. Now, that's not always what happens. Some years it's been 5 or 6, other years it's been nothing. But in general, NSF will allow us to, we call it an escalation, escalate your salary to assume that you're working for 5 years, you're gonna be making more down the line. Because there's typically a merit increase. The other option you have, if you're not a 9/10 month employee, would be if you were a 12-month employee, you could ask for overload pay or release time. Now, is anybody here a 12-month employee, other than us, all of us? No? Okay, well then we don't have to get into it. You don't have to worry about it then. Summer months are the easiest thing to put on there. The next category would be B, other personnel. And this is where you're going to have other people who are not senior or key personnel. So this is where your grad student pay would go, your undergrad pay. Maybe you have somebody else on the project. Maybe you have you're paying, I don't know, maybe you're building something with wood and you have a carpenter. Maybe you have any sort of other thing that could be clerical or any sort of job that is being created temporarily for this project. Their pay would go into other personnel. So basically, they're not, people who are other personnel are not responsible for the design and implementation of the whole project. They're just kind of auxiliary people, right? They're helping you. They're still important, but they're not important enough to be in the senior key personnel category. And if you ever are confused about that, don't worry, we'll help you figure out where the people go. Fringe benefits. This differs if you're a grant-funded employee or not. I'm going to assume nobody here is a grant-funded employee. So you're probably paid out.
But that doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah. So you guys are paid out of ones, which means your department ID that you're paid out of starts with a 1. So you're just going to have FICA, which is added to your salary. So it's just 7.65%. Sorry. So we will take care of that when we add your salary in. Now, the next ones are a little bit trickier. So as you saw, it goes down from A, B, C, D, et cetera, right? So we've moved down to the next pot of things you can ask for NSF. And the ones I want to draw attention to are D, equipment, and F, participant support costs. These often trip people up because they sound obvious, but they're really not. So equipment is actually a very technical, specific federal definition of what you think is equipment. So we'll help you do this, but just for your reference, it's supposed to be anything that is $5,000 or more per unit cost, and that will have a, what is the terminology they use? Basically, that is useful for the project for over a period of a year, right? So if you were buying a giant, you were buying a Hadron Collider, right? You were going to buy the Hadron Collider and you're going to put it here somewhere at J&D, right? And it's only $20,000 because you're getting a good deal because they're liquidating it, right? You can put that there. And the reason this is a restricted category is because indirect costs are not calculated on equipment, meaning we don't get a administrative fee on the simple purchase of equipment. So that category is a little restricted. We'll help you with what goes in there. Something to note though is equipment does not include, for example, computers. So that are under $5,000. So if you were buying a computer to use for this project, and NSF is nice, they actually let you use it for other projects too. If that laptop was under $5,000, you could just put it in material and supplies. You wouldn't have to put it into equipment. So equipment is restricted category. We'll help you with that. The other one is participant support costs. A lot of PIs make the mistake, they think that participant support cost means anybody participating in their program can go into here. And that's not really how it works. So participant is a very, very technical and annoying definition for federal programs in general and very difficult for NSF. We will help you figure out who's a participant. But basically the participant is somebody that is being enriched by your project in a very specific way and is not in turn performing work on your project. So they could be somebody that's being trained, but they can't then turn around and train other people. It also can't be, for example, it can't be you have Joe Schmo and he's in other personnel and he's your carpenter, he can't also be a participant being double paid, right? So if you're paid as project staff back up in A and B, you can't also then be a participant. So I won't get into this because it can require a lot of back and forth, but if you're unsure, again, just lean on your grant specialist. We know where people have to get slotted, and we'll help you figure out what's a participant and what's not a participant support cost. And again, these are excluded from indirect costs, so that's why this pool of money matters so much to the federal government when you put people in there. Okay, so equipment and participant support costs, just remember to ask your grant specialist to help you with those. The other ones are simpler, travel and other direct costs. I won't go into travel. I will break out other direct costs for you quickly. So other direct costs breaks out into a couple useful categories. I don't even think this is displaying all of them, to be honest. It's materials and supplies is the biggest one. So this is where you would put, if you bought a computer for the project that's under $5,000, for example. You have to buy some specific books or materials for your project. Anything that's specific to your project that you need to carry out the project can go into materials and supplies. And I put a little asterisk beside that. Some things are not supposed to go into materials and supplies. We'll help you with that. But in general, materials and supplies is a good category that's easy to figure out. Publication costs is another one that's easy. So if you were planning to publish the results of what you were doing and you needed to pay some fee, some open access fee, something along those lines, you're allowed to ask for that. It's an allowable cost. Consultant services would be if you were specifically paying somebody outside of JMU as a consultant. So you had somebody at another school that was going to evaluate part of your project, help you carry it out, that kind of thing. They can go into consultant services and they would be paid externally. I will note, if you have somebody else at JMU, so you have somebody else that's being a consultant, if you will, at JMU that's evaluating your work, you would not pay them down here. You would pay them up in A or B. We're not technically allowed to call them consultants, so we would find another creative name for somebody else working on your project. So consultant services is somebody external to JMU that you'd be paying. Computer services is a little tricky. It's we can help you with it. Computer services is basically if you can include in here things like if you were, I don't know if you, let's say you were doing something with the human genome and you had to pay some exorbitant fee to access the data to see all of this data related to DNA and you needed an access fee, you could put it in there. There's a couple things that they're specific about for computer services. So there are a lot of allowable costs to help you basically facilitate research.
What about licenses, if you need a license to a specific computer program?
That sometimes depends on whether we're going to put it in computer services or material and supplies, so we'll make a determination about it. But I can't stress enough, your grant specialists are your best friends. They're going to help you figure out where everything goes so that it's not a headache for you.
Does that computer services include like cloud-based services like Azure or things like that, or?
It does, but you're not supposed to put certain things in there. Like you can't just say, well, I know that it costs JMU IT $500 a month to store this, so I'm going to just pad the budget and pay JMU IT. You're not allowed to do that. But if it was specific to the project, then yeah, you can have some cloud service fees put in there. And then the easiest one is other. When something is not easy to be placed anywhere else, you have a nice big pot of other, and we can put lots of things in there. And so then at the end of this entire process, everything that's a direct cost gets totaled up into H. And then from there, we do our base, as I said, we take certain things out, then we apply indirect costs, and then you arrive at your grand total for everything.
Which should be at least 400,000.
Yes, which should be the minimum that we said earlier. I'll go back to these really quickly. 400,000 over 5 years, or if you're doing one of the ones on the other side, then 500,000.
But there are no restrictions per year, right?
I didn't see any restrictions per year in this one, no. So you could have 150 one year and less the next year. Sometimes they will do that, but I didn't see it in the guidelines for year. Did you, Lauren? Did anybody else see it? Okay, yeah, I didn't think so. I don't think they're saying it has to be 100, in 15 or whatever per year.
It's worth, because it goes to career, but then it goes to a core program, it's also worth kind of looking at the budget restrictions for the core program. You don't necessarily have to follow those, is my understanding, because it's going to career, but that can give you a ballpark for what they're looking for.
And I'll say one last thing. When you work with our office, we will provide you with a spreadsheet. That is our template that we use, an internal one, and we use this to fill out the budget on research.gov for you. If you don't want to play around in the budget, then you don't need to worry. You can just send us a bullet point list of things that you think you're going to need. You're going to say, I have a grad student doing X, Y, Z. I want the salary. I got random things, computer, I got to buy horses. Whatever you're going to do that's allowable, right? You put it in a list for us, you tell us, we'll go through it, we'll put it in the budget, and then we'll kick back and say, well, you're not allowed to buy horses. Sorry.
It's to power your Hadron Collider.
Yeah, it's the horses are to power your Hadron Collider. Yeah. Great, so that's all I had for this. I didn't want to get too technical on the budgets because, again, that's our job. We'll help you with that. We want to make it as painless as possible for you. But it is worth pointing out that since it's a grant and there's money involved, as far as the federal government cares, the budget does matter. It might seem like it doesn't, but it really does. You could have a great proposal, but if your budget's really wonky and you're buying horses, then they're not going to fund your project. So were there any questions? Anything I didn't cover you wanted me to cover? Go ahead.
Since we have you here, let's talk a little bit about time frame, right? Because OSP
Yes.
needs stuff done at certain times. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I can. So in general, we would love if you reach out to us as early as possible. So as soon as you are pretty sure you're going to apply and you're starting to work, reach out to us. We'll put it on a list. We'll assign you a grant specialist that will help you, and the grant specialist will sort of walk you through the process of working with our office. We want final materials in advance, at least 5 business days. And the reason for that is that we have a review process that involves not only us going through and making sure everything is done and dusted, but also your department head or your AUH has to sign off, and also your dean has to sign off. And so if we don't receive things in a timely manner before 5 business days, you run the risk of just never getting it done, right? What if your dean's out, or your dean wants more time, or your dean decides they don't like anything in your budget? You're asking for 30 course releases, and they're like, well, when are you ever going to teach? Why are you trying to buy all of your classes out? So there's reasons for it. We're not trying to be a hurdle. It's just we need time to go through your budget. Your AUH and your dean needs time to also sign off, and that's variable too. Your AUH and dean might not care as much about what you're putting in your budget. Others might. Others might be very experienced and say, I think maybe you should add this. You didn't see this thing that you should add from experience. I know you need it, etc. So work with us as early as you can, but we need final materials by at least 5 business days in advance.
So Brent, does that include the internal approval from the dean?
Internal approval form? Yes, yes. So
By 5 days before.
in theory, it would be great if at 5 days before the dean has signed off on the internal approval form. Now, if you've gotten everything to us and for whatever reason your dean is lagging and you're missing a signature, that's not a giant deal if it pushes into the 5-day window. We understand that. You can't control how long it takes for your dean to sign something, how long it takes for your AUH to sign something.
And Isaac, I can work with you to create a timeline checklist.
Right.
Because her and my colleagues aren't lucky.
Yes, I know, right? Great.
Yes, and research development is now offering a wonderful service. They will help you put together a big old checklist of all the things you have to do, not just budget things.
Could you talk a little bit on, can we move money around after, assuming we are awarded,
Yes.
right? We have the money.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say which has happened, I don't manage to hire the grad student when I plan, and then I have that money. Can I move that money around?
Yes, you
And
can.
what are the
Yes. So
rules for
and
that?
there are some restrictions on how you can move the money and what you can do with it. NSF is pretty, compared to other sponsors, they're very loose. They give you a lot of latitude. There are a couple restrictions that would require prior approval, meaning you'd have to come to us, we'd have to evaluate it, we'd have to say, okay, actually the sponsor wants to know about it. Then we'd write to them and ask them for permission, so they would have to approve that. NSF doesn't have as many of those. So we can, if you need to move money around after it's been awarded, reach out to our office. We'll figure out if it's a prior approval or if it can be done internally. A lot of times if it's small, like you didn't get to hire grad students, so maybe you're going to pay 2 undergrads, that's fine. They don't even need to know about it. But you do need to let us know so we can adjust your budget. But a lot of times with NSF, we can do it internally. It's a painless process. You tell us, we look at it, we make sure it's allowable, and then we turn it around quickly. So, yes. Some things that wouldn't be allowed, for example, or would need approval is if you had a bunch of equipment and you never bought it, and then you wanted to move that into paying yourself, right? That would require prior approval. Or if you're trying to reduce the amount of indirect costs, things like that. Some of them will require prior approval. But in general, NSF's pretty understanding. Maybe you plan to go to a conference and you didn't end up going and you want to use that money to buy something else. Very often you can, as long as it's an allowable cost. So you can't buy a horse, right? Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah,
I have another question.
yes.
So if you do enter into a no-cost extension phase,
Mm-hmm.
could I move money to pay myself? Because for example, like if you
yeah.
have the 5 years, I have my salary
Mm-hmm.
for 5 years, right?
Yes.
But then usually, like, things go into no-cost, not usually, but it can happen that you go into a no-cost extension, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can I move money for that, for salary support, to pay undergrads, to pay someone?
Sometimes, yes. It would depend on how much you're doing, the percentage of the budget, and a couple other particulars. But yes, you can. Any other questions? Grants in general, NSF?
Maybe not relevant for career, but if a grant requires an external evaluator, would that typically be other costs or a consultant?
An external evaluator, usually, well, so it depends. We can put it in other or we can put it in consultant. It depends on what they're actually doing.
Okay.
Consultant services is in the NSF budget is a little formal. So usually they'd want to know who the people are, is it a firm, what's the firm's going rate? They would want documentation along those lines. If it's less formal, if it's like you know somebody who's an expert in your field at another school and you want to pay them to have input, then you can just put it into other direct costs other, and it's easier that way. That way you don't have to provide a specific hourly rate or things along those nature. So consultant service is a little more formal. Typically we find a lot of people just will use other direct costs other to pay people. You also have the $10,000 rule for procurement too, which I can get into if you want or not. I can skip that.
I
Okay,
think
yeah.
I remember that from.
That does bring up another great reason to talk to OSP, because in addition to all of the federal rules, all of the NSF rules, we also have to worry about the state and JMU rules.
Yes.
And they will help you make sure that you're not running afoul of procurement rules or Virginia state rules that, that you might not be aware of if you're just looking at the NSF regulations.
Yes, that is a good point, Lauren. Yes. We kind of navigate all the rules at the same time for you, so you don't have to memorize all of the rules in advance of JMU about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Brent.